So lovely. Thank you again for joining once again one of our Human Synergistics webinars. And I'm very happy to be joined today by Martin Daubney of Inspire Coaching from Basel, Switzerland, and his focus on helping people perform at their best every day without burning out. And Mr. Daubney uses Human Synergistics instruments in part of his toolbox that he uses to help coach leaders and create development. One of those tools that you've actually talked about on your YouTube channel, which I very much appreciated. Those are great if anyone hasn't seen them. Your YouTube content is really nice. But in any case, one of the instruments from Human Synergistics that you use and I think enjoy and appreciate is the LWS, or Leadership Work Styles. So really excited to have the chance to talk to you today about your experiences using the tool and best practices and what we can all learn from your great work. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been I said to you before the recording started, it's been in the planning for a while, and it looked like it was a long way off. And I looked at my calendar, thought, oh, it's today. So yeah, here we are. Surprise!
Happy surprises, right? I know we plan these things out far in advance, and then they still sneak up on us. But
yeah,
fair enough. Very happy to have you here today. So one of the topics we sort of were kicking this off with was the point that I think you had shared around the idea that there are leaders in leadership positions who sort of 10% of them, I think was the point, really come to those positions with, I guess you could say, natural talent to lead and can fulfill that leadership role sort of effectively. Whereas the majority of leaders that we see in organizations really need some help, some guidance, some coaching, in terms of how to lead at their best. And I know I see this across all of our clients, because most of the people who are in leadership positions aren't actually trained to be leaders, if you will, right? They're fantastic engineers, they're computer data scientists, they're, doctors and surgeons and all sorts of interesting, phenomenal skills, but they actually don't have a training and background in directly in leadership. And so, once we get to that level of where we're leading the organization and influencing people, I always say the purpose of the role changes dramatically. It's not just for you to be a high performer in what you do. Now, as a leader, your primary purpose is to enable other people to be high performers in what they do. So and that speaks directly to the need for coaching, really, I think, for the vast majority, if not all leaders, to really bring out their best, learn best practices, learn methods that really work, and get good feedback and learn. So anyway, happy to talk to you on that topic today.
Well, as you were saying that, a thought came to my mind about, so I haven't always been in this coaching leadership development space. I have had in past lives a corporate background as well. And sometimes you get lucky with a boss leader, sometimes not so lucky. And I got really lucky very early on. A couple of guys come to mind. There was one when I was still a teenager, and we were moving into a brand new store in a brand new shopping mall in England. And there was so much to do that the boss came and took his jacket off, rolled his sleeves up, and actually got stuck in with the menial task that I was doing, just because it was so overwhelming. So that leading by example bit's great. And then in my first postgraduate job, I was working in the pharmaceutical industry and had a manager. And if I look back now, he absolutely exemplified that humanistic, encouraging behavior of finding out not everyone got on with everybody in the team, but he would find the best in them and pull it out and let everybody else know, he might not be good at this, but wow, is he good at that? And you go, oh, okay, thanks for bringing that out. So you see that in leaders. I haven't always been that lucky to have such great leaders. I'll not mention those that aren't. But I also see it in some of the work I do. So in established corporations, you still have those people who've been promoted into a leadership role kind of as a reward. And leadership isn't a reward, it's a responsibility. It comes with a host of things that need to happen. And through some of the leadership training outside of the LWS for an organization, people kind of came into the training thinking perhaps that after they finish the training on Friday, then on the Monday when they take up their leadership role, they're suddenly a leader. No, that's rather high expectation. And if I encourage anyone to do anything, it's a little bit consistently.
Yes. Yeah. Oh
So
boy.
apply that.
Right.
Let's see if that works. Let's see if this train of thought, this model of behavior, this thing gets the best out of the people. And
Yeah.
if it does, do more of it, and then add something else, and then add something else. And then maybe in a year, you might consider yourself to have become a leader,
Yeah.
in its first flight of leadership.
That's right.
But yeah, it's not a switch people can switch on, and often because of that, if you're not a natural born leader, I think that statistic actually came from Gallup, who identified this. If you're not a natural born leader, then you're paralyzed. Some people move into that leadership, and then all of a sudden it hits them. It's a bit like being prime minister of the UK. They want the job, and then they realize it's quite tough.
Yeah. There's leadership by position, and then there's true leadership. And those really are two different things. A couple of things I really liked you mentioned. One of them is, thinking about leaders who've had a really positive influence on us in the past. It's one of my favorite examples to use with new clients when we're talking about ideal behavior and leadership development in terms of what kind of behavior should we be exhibiting and role modeling and enabling in this business. There's a silly little exercise I love to do with just having people think of the most motivating, inspiring, positive leader that they've experienced. Usually people have hopefully at least one that they can reference, and then think about, what behavior did we see from them, and where is that, and understanding not just that they were an effective leader and had a wonderful positive influence on my ability to perform, but why that is, what were they doing that enabled that, so that we can learn from that and use it moving forward. And that really connects to the other point that you made, which I also say far too frequently. It's not about changing everything overnight. It's about small steps and doing those things consistently over time, and building a pattern of positive, effective leadership is what it's all about. Oftentimes we see people get really enthusiastic and they really want to, shift and change everything overnight. But it really is it's a marathon. It's a journey, not a sprint. And
and to that end, you've highlighted another memory in my mind. A new leader that came into the team said, "I'm not changing anything. Tell me everything before I do anything." So they were just gathering information. What's going on? How's it working? What's what doesn't work? Where are the gaps? All of that information. They just want to. I want to absorb everything. Then I can make decisions about how to best utilize not only the people but the resources in other ways as well.
And there's a lot to say to that. I mean, I love the approach of getting, HS, right? I love the approach of getting good information first, understanding where we are, where we're going, what's going to get us there, those basics before we start to really implement our strategy and leadership. Fantastic. So how long have you been using LWS?
LWS only a couple of years, but I used some of the other circumplex assessments before that in can I name the company? A Swiss dental implant company. I don't know. You may know who they are.
Yes, indeed we can. No, they're actually published. You're speaking about Straumann, I assume.
I am, yes.
I'm trying to find my books here. I'm terrible. But yes, they're published in our book, Creating Constructive Cultures.
Wonderful
case.
I think I was in the first wave of their journey with human synergistics. It's just, the whole thing's fascinating.
Isn't it?
The bit I really, really like, and it's the hardest bit for some organizations to take, is that big mirror reflection piece that after you go in and say, what's it like here? They go, oh yeah, it's fine, everything works, and everything's tickety-boo. So, what's your ideal then? What would you say was the best? And they describe the best. It's, okay, let's do an assessment. Let's see how it really is. And then you have the chalk and cheese. And oh, okay, maybe there's something we need to do here. That eye-opener bit is revealing. And then it goes down to the personal level. And the little miniature bits of small behavior that individuals collectively have joined together to make the culture that is, but also need to make the culture they want to be.
Yes,
that whole piece is just fascinating.
Yeah. And I mean, some of those steps are steps we try to go through with every client.
Mm,
Thinking about what we want taking place, what should be, how we should behave, how we should lead our people. Ideal type descriptions of what
mm,
we want going on here. And I like to tie those things usually to performance. What's really going to lead us forward? What's going to drive our organization? What do we need? 2 years from now in order to be the kind of business we want to be. The other thing, of course, is always values.
yeah,
What's consistent with our values, and then looking at the current state separately, so that we're looking at where we want to go as compared to where we currently are. And I like that sort of framework because it helps to take some of the judgment out of this, I think, in terms
yeah.
of it's not that what we want is good and what we're doing now is bad.
No,
That's
not
not
at
the
all.
case at all,
No.
right? It's just understanding what are we doing right now, as compared to what do we want to do. And that's I hate to, one other point. It's another really strength, I think, of HS models. I have to say, sometimes I say to the client, we're really not telling you anything. You're telling yourself. You're describing what we should be, how we should be working here, and you're also separately describing what's currently taking place. The beauty is to be able to actually measure and capture those things, and then to be able to compare them directly and look at if there's a difference. And in any
Yeah,
development, I think that's the best way to start any form of development, personal, health,
yeah,
leadership, you name it, is getting a clear understanding of where am I and how's that affecting us, me, and
yeah,
where do I want to go and what do we want, and then how do I design that journey and start taking those consistent steps forward.
yeah, yeah. Very much so. I think it's almost a mashup of appreciative inquiry and positive psychology. It's kind of,
Right.
so where are we? Where what would be our dream? How would we describe the future, and how are we going to get there? But also recognizing, do you know what? We're successful and we do some
Right.
stuff well. So
Right.
let's keep doing what we do well and do
That's
less
right.
of what we don't do well.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, love it.
Yeah, and that is a beauty, especially at like our culture level tools. We can even illustrate and show things like correlation analyses. So we can literally show the client, what behavior is promoting, engagement, creative thinking, safety, customer
Yeah, yeah,
orientation, and what behavior is getting in the way and making that kind of performance more difficult.
yeah,
It's really not a judgment, it's a learning opportunity so that we
yeah,
can, moving forward, be more informed about the kind of behavior I, as a leader, need to be role modeling and encouraging and enabling in others.
yeah,
Um, and then that
yeah.
makes it actionable.
Yeah, I mean, it really is the best feedback delivered in the best way. It's it's so far removed from you're rubbish and you're not doing your job properly. Is and so much in that space of how can we actually get the best out of where you are and what you're doing. But inevitably, I think I have seen this, that sometimes the employee suddenly realizes, maybe this isn't the environment I want to work in. So
Mm,
you talk about values, that the personal values come into it as well. And then
yeah.
my personal values don't match the company values. Okay, now I realize why my career stagnated. So then there's
Yeah.
a nice and natural departure, and that's fine too. People have
Yeah.
to make their own decisions.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. I mean, when we look at individuals' values and in consistency with organization, I mean, usually we find that they're fairly similar. I mean, for the most part, when people read the value statement for the company they work with, typically
Yeah,
they agree with them. The gap is between that description and that value statement, and
and the
what's
doing.
actually happening.
Yeah.
And that's yeah, a topic I think I talked about just recently in one of our culture accreditations. It's almost a form of cognitive dissonance at
Hmm.
the organizational level.
Hmm.
What we say and espouse and describe as our values is not consistent with what we actually do. And that gap, the broader that becomes, I really find that has a whole other consequence for people in the organizations.
Yeah.
And I think connects to what you're describing, right? We talk about this as a
Yeah.
creative place where it's safe to speak up and everybody can bring their unique ideas. But in reality, we do something very different from
Yeah.
that, not intentionally, but there's something very different playing out. And as our employees experience that increasing disparity, um, we start to lose best talent and have difficulty retaining people because they feel like, right, how we work here isn't consistent with
Yeah. And then and
vows or
yeah. and employee engagement drops, and
Yes.
presenteeism creeps in, and too
Yeah.
many absences, and actually to some extent it increases the stress load in the organization, which naturally leads to increased burnout as well. So
Yeah.
it's none of it's healthy.
No, no. It has all kinds of. One of the other consequences I usually talk about is I say what you're actually doing in a lot of ways is teaching your people not to listen to you as leaders,
Yeah,
because you're standing up and saying that this is a creative place, but you're not enabling it, role modeling it, fostering it.
yeah,
So you're teaching people that what we say is not what we do, and therefore, to what extent can they really believe and trust in what I say as a leader moving forward? It's a huge credibility topic for
yeah,
the organization as well.
yeah. I ended up. You reminded me. I ended up facilitating a 2-hour session at the end of a team day for a fairly new team startup.
Right.
And the leader left the room. So I was left with the people in the room. Actually had to flex because what I thought we'd agreed didn't happen, and I had to dig in my toolbox. But anyway, it turned out I got them talking with each other, and doing more of, how do you get the best out of me, and what environment, all these sorts of things that you just ground level team building would just needs to happen to get the conversation happening, get people
Right.
knowing each other, building the trust level. And I got the feedback, that was the best session of the day. And I said, well, hang on, you had the senior leader, you had the CEO, you had all these people come. Yeah, and they all talked at us.
Yeah.
You allowed us to talk.
Right.
So it's true. If you've got an organization that needs your input, you've got to allow the input to come through.
Yes.
Otherwise, that's a complete mismatch. And I love the way in the LWS that can really sometimes be so clearly highlighted, because you have those aggressive behaviors highlighted in the red colors and the passive behaviors in the green colors. And quite often, if there's a lot of passivity in the
Mhm.
team, it's because there's a couple of really strong aggression people who
Right.
basically talk over everybody and don't allow that voice to be shared.
Exactly.
There are only so many times when people are prepared to say, but can I add, and get told no, and then it's like, oh, I'll give up. What's the point?
Yeah.
I'll just do my job.
No, exactly.
Uh,
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, we actually, we measure this. You can use LWS together with the group level instrument GSI. We have several clients who actually do this. It's really fascinating because you're measuring the behavior of the leader as well as the behavior of the team that they lead. And in many cases, you see exactly that sort of transactional relationship playing out. The more aggressively the leader behaves personally, the more passively the team tends to respond
yeah,
and
yeah,
attempt to approach their work.
yeah,
And to some extent, vice versa. But that kind of transactional pattern is not the most helpful or productive, or you know, contributing to the well-being that we want. Um, but
I
it's
mean,
fascinating to see.
I think bizarrely, if the leader comes across as being quite aggressive, then it drives the passive behavior from the rest of the team. But the more passive they are, the more aggressive the leader gets, because they
Right.
think that they need to shout
Correct.
louder to get the answers they want.
Exactly.
And actually,
Yep.
getting the leader to put the brake on that and to
Yeah.
trust the process is really, really hard,
That
because
is
they don't know any other way. So, and
right.
and and while we see that in the circumplex, actually, if you sit in the team, if you're just
That's the other. Yeah.
part of kind of
Hmm.
the fly on the wall and watch the behaviors, you think, wow, this is actually playing out in real life. And
Yes.
yeah, welcome to their world.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I like that instrument, the GSI, quite a bit. Is it's the only level of the tools where you can observe the behavior playing out. And we've even, you can think of really interesting things, like just imagine how the team works and behaves together when they're working with the leader in the team versus without the leader
Yeah,
in the team.
yeah,
And you start to realize what a difference that makes, and that tells you a lot about um, whether it makes a difference. Tells you a
yeah,
whole lot about that leader and their approaches.
yeah, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah. And we've had some really cool, one of my favorite examples of development, maybe not a best practice, but sort of a fascinating thing to see, is when clients use something like LWS with the group styles to measure their teams. We've had several cases where the organization and the coaching has really focused on developing the leaders exclusively. So they really didn't coach the team, develop the team. They're really just focused on the leadership development. But as that leader develops and shifts their behavior over time, so too does the team. And when we come back and remeasure, 9 months later, you can really see how the team's profile is sort of tracking with and following along and responding to the leader's profile, their behavior. And that's a very powerful thing, and something I always found really motivated the leaders we work with, because it's one thing to get feedback in terms of I've changed my behavior, and that's great in in a positive way. But it's really kind of empowering and inspiring to see that, well, by doing that, it's also had this add-on effect of encouraging different, more hopefully positive, goal-oriented, collaborative behavior in my team, and they're getting things done more effectively, efficiently. They're less stressed in working together. They're communicating better. And that has a whole lot to do with the role model that I'm setting. And
Yeah.
that's real leadership.
Yeah. The leaders, I mean, like almost anybody, is when you have numbers, things can get measured, and you pay attention to what gets measured. So
Yes.
I do think these assessments help in that way. But
Right.
it's some of the intangible things that when a leader changes the behavior to become more collaborative and humanistic, encouraging, and so on, that they clearly see. While if they don't do the measurement, they can still see and still feel
Yes.
greater productivity, greater
Yes.
engagement, and less conflict in the team.
Yeah.
And so many teams actually just waste resource and energy with that backbiting, that little did you see what
Oh,
they
yeah.
did, all of that negative energy that floats around the coffee machine as people wander off together into little huddles. They stop
Yeah.
because there's no
Yeah.
need for them, because the level of trust in the organization, the team has come up. With trust comes psychological safety, and people are encouraged to speak and
Exactly.
respected for speaking up rather than holding
Exactly.
back. And I think that has to be not only a good thing for the team, for the organization, but for the general mental well-being of that organization too. It all works hand in hand, as far as I can see.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Indeed.
I mean, stress, wherever it comes from, makes really, you know what I'm going to say, makes really intelligent people do some stupid things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll come to that one, but I like what you just said about, basically noticing positive change along this development process. Sometimes I call these the breadcrumbs
Yeah,
as we go down the
yeah,
journey, because even though we use these kinds of instruments, to measure where we are right now, and then we're going to go through development of, 6, 9 months, and then we're going to remeasure and look at
yeah,
the change. That's very motivating, inspiring, exciting to see that. But, something needs to we need to get more positive recognition along the way, of how this is helping. And this is something we consistently see with clients, exactly as you've described.
yeah,
We're working to create a whole different pattern in how we lead our people, but we've noticed along the way, even though we're not quite there yet, we've noticed as we progress that communication is more
yeah,
open, my
yeah,
team is becoming more proactive, and
yeah,
those are sort of the little positive breadcrumbs that we really
yeah,
have to encourage leaders to recognize along the way, because those are the things that help us understand that this is working. It's
yeah,
usually the things I find that oftentimes motivate leaders the most, because even
yeah,
though it's cool to be able to measure the change and the positive growth, in a lot of ways it's more motivating to see my people enjoying their work,
yeah,
and working as a cohesive team, and sharing creative ideas that can be helpful. And if I am able to recognize that along the way, it helps reinforce the fact that we're moving in the right direction,
yeah.
and to continue that development.
I mean, the soft PR side of that, as well as your employees then go home and tell everyone what a great place it is to work there.
Yeah,
Whereas,
absolutely.
oh, I hate, and I think it is true. People don't really leave organizations because they're much the same, really,
Yes.
structurally. They give you a salary, there's a pension pot, all that sort of stuff. They leave ineffective or bad or poor
Leaders.
leaders.
Yes.
And that happens so often. I've seen it so many times.
Yeah.
Change the leader behavior, not the leader necessarily, but the
Right.
behavior of the leader, and you can really influence the culture of the team and go
Absolutely.
from, well, you can actually go from something that's not performing, but even if they are performing, you can take them into that. I kind of, it's the golden chalice, isn't it? That high performing space.
Yeah.
where people
Yeah.
love to be. Yeah.
Exactly. And high performance is actually one of the most common ways that our tools are used, meaning LWS is used for creating in what's described as high performance leadership development,
Yeah.
GSI and the team level for creating high performing teams,
Yeah.
and culture is a lot of it for our clients is about creating a high performing culture.
Yeah.
I always come down to the three things of performance, well-being,
Yeah.
engagement, those and values. And
Yeah.
the beautiful synergy here is that if we get it right, we can create it can foster behaviors that drive all of those things.
Yeah.
Positive goal oriented behaviors that help us perform, the collaborative behaviors that help us be engaged and motivated and work effectively together, and using those kinds of patterns that are again consistent with our values and
Yeah.
describe how we do things at our best. And that's really the beauty is all of those things do come together once we can align leadership
Yeah.
and culture.
No, it's lovely. It is good.
Yeah, it's fun. It takes some time. Actually, I've got another webinar one of these days coming up on that topic of how long this kind of development really takes. Thankfully, now with the kind of data and models that we give people and the best practices that you coach them through, we really do see positive change in the vast majority of our clients. But now one of my focuses is trying to kind of accelerate that. A
Well,
lot of times I find that
I mean,
we could be doing this more.
yeah, I mean
Yeah,
there's that in the age of instant gratification,
right.
which doesn't really happen with behavior. Um,
True.
uh, my belief, my understanding of behavior is we are habitual creatures by nature, so we like to do things over and over again, whether they serve us or not, so long as we're still safe in our
It works.
safe bubble,
Yeah.
whatever that
Yeah.
means for you.
Mhm.
Um, and change often means breaking a habit, that something you've been doing regularly, into something else that you need to do regularly to get a different result. Well, for some people that can be as quick as apparently 17 days. For others it can take as long as 240, which is getting on to 9 months or more of the year.
Yeah.
So yeah, the idea that you can expedite some of that and speed it up, I find
Right.
quite interesting. But I think it, in order to do that, it requires a bit more nudging through the ear. Is the idea,
Yeah.
and this is where I find some organizations think doing something like this is a one and done thing. Need to
Yeah.
just wake up a bit and realize that if you're going to change something, it takes more than a workshop. It takes
Right.
iterative meetings and nudging and
Yeah.
posting and connections, and and who's going to do that? Well, if you're the leader, you're part of the problem, respectfully. So you're in
Or
that
part of this.
constellation that is part of that problem. So you need an external. And
Right.
some organizations use a member of the HR, and some people use accredited coaches from Human Synergistics, which is my preferred route, actually.
Mine as well.
So
Yeah.
so yeah, having someone run the assessments, have the coaching, and understand what it all means, do a workshop together, have another workshop 2 or 3 months later, but in between
Yeah.
whiles, have touch points, have
Yeah.
nudges, have
Absolutely.
accountability within that, and not really expect to see, well, you're going to expect to see some low-hanging fruit being picked. So you get
Sure.
some very quick wins. But if you want that deeper, lasting, meaningful change in the organization, in the team, it's going to take 6 to 9 months before you go, oh, this
Right.
feels different. If I
Right.
reflect back, this feels different.
Right.
And
Yeah.
just to run onto that, my view, one of the greatest tools that anyone can use in facilitating their change is journaling, however you call it,
Yes.
diarying, journaling, reflection, journal, whatever it is, to say, okay, what happened? What do I intend to happen this week? Monday, Friday. What happened this week? Did I do it? Why not? If not, can I do it next week? Moving that along so that in 6 to 9 months' time, you can look back and go, wow, I am now completely different to how I am, how I was back then. Yeah, things have changed significantly. But you
Yeah.
only do that if you record it.
That's right. And that's such a great coaching practice.
Yeah.
Journaling, especially around things like I've always heard things like, your interactions with your team, right?
Yeah.
How often do you come into contact with them? Are they asking questions?
Yeah.
Are you explaining things? And people can see, how basically how I spent my time with my people previously versus how I'm spending my time now and what I'm doing with, and that becomes apparent. You're absolutely right, because even though it's a, a step-by-step journey, sometimes we lose perspective of how
Yeah.
much progress we've really made.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a little bit like renovating an old wreck of a house. And you need to take pictures when it's a wreck and all the floorboards are
that's
out and there's
true.
plaster off the walls. So we lived in this. And
That's
then a
right.
year later go, ta-da!
That's
Yeah,
right.
look how
Absolutely.
far
Be
we've come.
proud of and build
Yeah,
something
yeah,
greater. Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, well, we'll have to talk about it. It's I agree with you that that actual coaching process of, whatever it is, typically 6 to 9 months of, really doing the work and creating the change is hard to shorten, hard to make that really much quicker. But where I see clients really expending unnecessary time, if I will, it comes before that. They've decided that they need change. They've decided that where they are as a company isn't going to get them where they want to go in the future, but they're struggling with what direction is that, and what is good performance here, and what's going to get us forward, and what were our values again, and are those still relevant, and do those still apply to
yeah,
generation X and Y, and it's all of this sort of is leadership behavior important, and what behavior really drives performance. It's all of those sort of initial learnings before we get down to the actual act and steps of change and development that
yeah, yeah.
take
It's
time.
yeah, it's I don't know if there's a model. There probably is a model, but I always like to look at it of the awareness of need to change and then the acceptance of the need to change. And often
Yes.
that, I think something needs to change here, not sure what it is. And then you have months of discussion and go, okay, now I accept it. And then you take action. There's
Right.
a big, my view, I might be wrong, often a big gap between becoming aware and accepting. But
Exactly.
once you
That's
accept,
it.
then taking
Yeah.
action is really, really quite
There
swift.
you go. Exactly. And those are the awareness, acceptance, action steps that we talk about with
Yeah,
LWS.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I had another client who we worked with for 14 years on their culture journey.
Oh no.
And it's been an amazing experience. But one of the things in the initial stages is it really was sort of frustrating for something like 2 years. The organization was just struggling with awareness and acceptance.
Hmm.
And I can even tell you, it was one of these things where they really believed, sort of on the surface level, that aggressive behavior in their business, and unfortunately this isn't all that uncommon, but aggressive behavior is necessary. It somehow contributes to our performance, our speed, our quality, our whatever. And not only is that not what we typically find, but it's something that we can measure in your organization and show you exactly how that behavior actually, affect. And initially it was, okay, let's have a look at our cult, if our aggressive behavior really is, counterproductive. So, we show them all the data and they go, yeah, it looks like it is counterproductive. Well, but what about something else? And so then they come up with other performance criteria. What about customer orientation or safety? And then we research all of that and give them more data. And yeah, in fact, it is costing us there. It took them something like 2.5 or 3 years for the leadership team to really accept and understand that that behavior is not what we want moving forward, and it actually accounts for a dramatic extent for the things that are getting in the way and holding us back. And
Yeah,
another one of the learnings that really blew their mind was, and you can show this in organizations, look, the more aggressively we behave, the more passively, as you described,
yeah,
others will behave.
yeah,
And they really were able to recognize much more clearly that passive behavior is absolutely not what's leading us forward.
yeah,
So in some ways, they've said we've got to do away with aggressive, in part mainly because it's encouraging so much passive behavior. But whatever the learning is, getting past those initial steps, it 3 years, you could have
yeah,
actually changed your culture by
yeah,
now if you
yeah,
if you
yeah,
could have been a little more
yeah,
open to the
yeah.
truth. But
I mean, it's no doubt that aggressive behavior can get results. You've only got to look at athletics and hear now stories of coaches who are really quite brutal in bringing their prodigies on,
right,
and those
right.
those people got medals, but then they were complete wrecks afterwards. So it's driving a behavior of too much stress in the system that really, yeah, you can get results short term, but it's not a long term strategy for
Yeah.
maintaining that success. And I know that I know it's not measured in any, directly measured, but the data that comes out from using human synergistics tools, particularly leadership work styles, is that when things change for the better, then if you look at the HR data about absenteeism and particularly burnout, that drops. So it's not part of the initial, let's measure this at the same time, but if you do it before and after, in our previous culture, cool, look at the burnout rate. Now we've changed. Burnout rate's gone down. Well, that's a bit weird, isn't it?
Funny how this happens every time. It's weird. Yeah, exactly. And then those are the sorts of things that we oftentimes start talking to clients about, because, if they're going to invest in culture development, leadership development, a lot of times they don't just want to see a change in the profile. They want to see a bottom line, return on that investment, which I 100% agree with. And that's the reason we need to be asking about, what is your burnout rate, employee turnover, how difficult is it to attract best talent, sick days, as you mentioned. Those are the kinds of tangible things that the client can, attach a cost to. And then when we come back, demonstrate that, the lower rates of those issues and the amount that they're really saving in terms of their efficiency, by having a more healthy culture and positive leadership example. Yeah.
So it's kind of
funny how it works.
A wellness. It's a wellness program by the back door, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, it is. It is. We're unintentionally helping you more than you might be aware.
Yeah. It's not. We don't need anyone to come in and do yoga and that sort of thing, but just change your behavior. That make a vast difference.
Yeah, and it's amazing how in organizations, especially leadership development is so critical, because when you look at the big picture of the organization as a system, you really have two things playing out internally. One is the culture that's influencing how everyone behaves, and the other factor primarily really is leadership. And you've got this pattern where leaders drive culture and culture drives leadership, and around and around that reinforcing pattern goes until we create some awareness that what's happening isn't really the best practice for us. And secondly, we break that pattern. But, I always say culture isn't going to change itself. You've got, therefore the leadership, those are the people who have the responsibility and capability to change that cycle and create a new pattern. But it means they have to, get to that acceptance step and understand this and be willing to put it into practice and make it a priority. And I think that's one of the other topics that frustrates me in terms of, it takes quite a bit of time often for organizations to see this as what it really is, a true top priority for their business performance. One of my favorite culture development journeys that created tremendous positive change for the business, its people, its profitability, was one in which, in any case, at one of the annual meetings for all leadership, the CEO stood on stage and said, we have basically two goals for our business this year and moving forward. The first strategic goal is to, bring all of our companies together. It's one of these where we had a lot of new organizations that they had purchased, and we need to get us all together into kind of one organization and organized and better serve our customers, and sort of the efficiency performance focus. The other thing we need to work on is our culture, and of those two things, the culture and leadership development must come first, because if we can't do that, then we're not going to be effective in being able to deliver on our other strategic points. And that's exactly the kind of framework that we need in organizations, so that leaders see, like I like to say, what they can actually control. You as a leader can't control the profitability. It seems tempting to think you can, but you can't. You can't control whether people stay in the organization or choose to leave. You can't control how engaged they are. What you can control is yourself, your behavior, how you interact with your team, whether you give positive feedback and recognize good work. That's what you can affect. And if you do those kinds of positive things and take those steps, then the other dominoes in the system will fall in the direction we're hoping. But we as leaders need to understand what we can do and focus on that and recognize that as a priority.
100%. Human synergistics, I think, also positive psychology and all those other things we talked about, works also in emotional intelligence. So fundamentally, I mean, you said there, we can choose how to behave. The environment is a big influencer,
Absolutely.
but we got to recognize that environment and actually recognize our own behavior, and we can choose it. Whenever I talk about these things, I like a ride on a roller coaster I had with my wife when we first met. In middle of Europe, there's a place called Europa Park in Germany, and it has apparently the tallest roller coaster. It matches the one in Blackpool. It's the tallest one.
Oh, wow.
I think it's even the same ride, and depends on how warm the day is and how much it's expanded. It could well be the tallest.
That close, okay.
Yeah, but it doesn't even have a loop. And she was reluctant to go on it, and we both went on it, and I was, yeah, and she was screaming her head off. Now, same environment, same experience, different choice in behavior.
Yeah, well, if it was a conscious choice at all, I suppose. But yes, I mean, yeah, that's something I like to talk about. I mean, once we can measure these things and make them tangible and visible, then you start to get to some of my favorite coaching questions are just tremendously simple things. Like, and once I get my profile and I see that I'm behaving a little aggressively, then we can ask some targeted questions around, when does that sort of thing happen? In what situations are you behaving in that way? What's going on around you? And people will start to recognize, well, I do this when I'm in this situation, or worried about this, or stressed out about, right?
Or even before that, to say, what do you believe you were doing?
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
I actually didn't believe I was being aggressive, but so what did you believe, and what did others see that made them think? So
right. Why does this seem like the right thing to do? Can you recognize consequences to doing that? It might work in certain situations, but do you recognize the cost that it has? And then moving forward, can we make a better decision? Even though that might be something that's encouraged by the situation and context. Again, one of my favorite quotes is, the only things that we can control in our lives is the way that we think and the way that we behave, which is exactly why it's useful to measure those things, because that's what we, moving forward, can personally affect.
And often the difference is a deep breath.
Right. Yeah.
It really doesn't take much to stop and go and pause and go, okay, that wasn't right, this is right. And the more you do it, the better you are at it, and the quicker that gap shortens.
That's right.
So yeah, the other thing I think is really, really helpful when you get to that level of trust in the team is allowing others to call you out. And there is a leadership team I've worked with, and one of them said something. I went, oh, it's a bit passive aggressive. And they said, was it? And someone else said, yes. And I said, well, why didn't you call it out? If you saw it too, why didn't you call it out? Why have me, the external called it out? And the person who made the passive aggressive comment said, actually, I've been told that by my daughter, so maybe I am. Said, well, yeah. Your children can often be your best mirror.
Oh, yes.
So listen to them too. But I find it interesting that people in organizations, in teams, have this desire to change, and they see what could happen if they made that change. But some of those smaller steps, including, by the way, John, you're a bit passive aggressive there. Hope you don't mind me saying, in a passive way. Some of those little things would help, just
no, absolutely.
But often reluctant.
Yeah, and it's another example of how culture influences individual behavior. I'm not speaking up because, the answer to that question is probably cultural. It's not safe to do that here. If I speak up and criticize, somebody's going to take it the wrong way. I need to keep relationships comfortable and nice. It's safer just not to say anything. And that's a great example of not just how culture affects leader behavior and vice versa, but why it's more difficult to create positive change in organizations that are what we would describe as increasingly defensive. The more insecure people feel in the culture, the more, the harder it is for them to speak up and do the kind of, so often when I do accreditations and we talk about best practices for debriefing and coaching, there are some great practices like sharing your report with your team, asking
Oh,
for ongoing feedback, right? Checking in with one another. But in organizations that are extremely security oriented and people feel it doesn't feel safe to share my report with my team. Somebody's going to judge me because I've got more red than someone else, or right, these sorts of things. And it's not safe to ask for feedback. And even if I do, nobody will provide it. So it's really one of those catch 22s where the organizations and the leaders that we really could help the most, those are they're doing the sort of things that unfortunately make learning and growth most difficult.
yeah.
But that's really where we have to start.
Yeah. Yeah. The sharing my report with others is an interesting one. And
Yeah.
what flashed in my mind there was it depends on the level, but it doesn't actually. I think I've seen very senior people openly share their report with others,
Yeah.
possibly because no one's going to challenge them and say, "Oh, a bit red there."
Fair.
And
Well,
actually, as it comes down a bit, people are a little less reluctant, even though the team
yeah.
would love it if
Right.
their team leader would share it. So there's a massive gain to be had for a leader to share and say, do you know what? And I'm working on some of these, and I want you to help me.
Absolutely.
And then
Absolutely.
as a
No, it's
team, we can work forward. But
yeah.
you mentioned the red, and people are a bit embarrassed by the red and the aggressive behavior. Sadly, in my experience, people proudly wear their
Can be
red
proud of
badge
it. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I get things done.
Yes.
I'm the one who
Kind of.
kicks butts,
In quotes. Yes.
It's like, yeah, you do, but there is another
Yeah.
way.
There's collateral damage.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Have you ever
Yeah.
looked behind you and see the damage that you've
The
done?
cost. Yeah. It's something, I mean, coming from the research department of HS, it's something I've always been really interested in because unlike passive behavior, when you look at just the data and correlations and such around aggressive behavior, you can, like you said, you can get things done with aggressive behavior. But it's fairly rare that we really get things done effectively in
Yeah,
that way.
yeah.
It's something like 80 to 90% of the time we're actually underperforming.
Yeah,
It's only, maybe 10% of the time that sort of works,
yeah.
but it doesn't really work. It's not high performance because,
No,
the other fascinating thing is, even when it appears to work, it has created more collateral damage than the benefit.
always, always.
Yes, I reached my personal sales
Yeah,
target for this
yeah,
month, but I've frustrated the customers. They're not happy with
yeah.
us and me and don't want to buy from us again. I'm not working with my team. I'm not sharing best practices. We're all underperforming. I
Yeah,
just look better, in
yeah.
comparison with the rest. It's the illusion of performance at the cost
100%,
of it. It's
100%.
amazingly frustrating. And people get in those environments and they can't, they don't recognize it's too hard. It's almost impossible to get an objective perspective when you're in that system. And you don't realize how it's actually playing out. And then we end up doing what is far too common, and that is, systemically encouraging counterproductive behavior.
Yeah,
And you
yeah,
see that,
yeah,
in the majority of organizations.
yeah, yeah. But what's bizarre about all of that, of course, they're piped up and they think they're energized, but they're not. They got massive stress load and
Right.
cortisol flushing through their
Right.
veins and
Yeah.
causing internal damage and so on. And what they're pushing with other people is pushing them into more of a survival mode,
Right.
and survival is stress. So they're also flooded with cortisol and living
Yeah.
with
Exactly.
this environment. And none of us can be at our best when we flooded with cortisol. We have to be in a
Exactly.
much more centered, calm, coherent state in order to be truly at our best and in that flow state that
Yep.
just in, basically you are at your best every day without burning out, to coin a phrase. Don't know where that came from, but that's exactly what happens.
Yep.
And a aggressive leader, whoosh, they're not making great decisions really, and you often find that they make a decision and change it and change their mind again because it wasn't right the first time because they weren't thinking straight, and the
Right.
team is just overwhelmed and overstressed and also not performing at the best and making mistakes along the way.
Mhm.
Yeah, not a good recipe. They think they're taking action and doing things, but as an old boss of mine once said, you're mistaking activity for progress.
Yeah. Yeah. Mistaking action for performance.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the same
exactly
thing.
right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and it's very sort of subtle and convincing, and unfortunately, it really does become a pattern in companies.
It
I
does.
met I remember there was a sort of a silly example about competitive behavior. That's one of the ones that's in our model that sort of sounds good. We want competition.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get into it. I mean, in terms of what we're actually measuring and how that's different from what people are thinking about in terms of competitive. But I remember years ago, we had a client who, in terms of culture in the organization, had quite a bit of competitive behavior playing out. And it was also one of those organizations that really kind of believed in many ways that that brought out the best. And uh, I remember one year they were telling me about their global employee survey, and that they were attempting to encourage everyone to answer their global employee survey,
Yeah.
get the highest response rate possible. And so they started doing turning it into a competition, and they were incentivizing, those who answered most quickly and with the highest percentage. And they were actually punishing locations in various ways who weren't. So in any case, this went on for a few years. And given the culture, I remember I actually talked to the leadership and I said, you might be careful about that kind of you know uh, method, because that kind of competition is going to lead to some consequences. No, this is great. It makes sure everybody answers. So anyway, it was the next year that they did this that they reached out to me and they said, yeah, we're going to change because this we can't do this anymore. They had one of their locations in the US um, got 100% response rate on the global employee survey in one day. So this competition had gotten to the point where the head of that location literally shut down production for one
Oh,
day,
wow.
had everybody sit down and answer, their global employee
Wow.
survey. And they celebrated it because, hey, we won. We got basically 100% in one day. Aren't we great? It cost the company something like $20 million of lost productivity and production.
Good
But
grief.
in that framework, that was winning. You know what I mean? And it's amazing. Like, well, you kind of did win, and it kind of did work, but that's not that's not the way to do
It's not healthy, is it?
it.
Not
Yeah,
healthy.
yeah.
Wow.
There's too much
Fascinating.
collateral damage with that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it's not that it can't work, but there are much better ways of working. Those are
yeah,
not the most healthy, effective way. And the other one, I'm sorry you pointed out, was people don't make good decisions with more stress. Really, the more we're operating in security orientation and fight and flight, and the amygdala rather than the frontal lobe is not the best process for
yeah.
making key decisions.
No, no. And um, it, I almost take it personally sometimes when I see a client who's clearly stressed and then says, "You don't understand. I thrive on stress." I think actually you don't. You haven't
No,
realized it.
no.
And then
Yeah,
of course it all goes horribly wrong for them.
yeah,
So heed the warning of others. We're to be fair, we are often the last to know that we're stressed. There's
right,
often someone at home who says, "You're a bit
right.
prickly today, darling." No, no.
Yeah,
Others will
yeah,
tell us before we realize it, and then
that's
we
true.
should listen. So,
That's true. And you mentioned that before with family members. I don't know if you've done this where you've had used LWS and had like a breakout group that was family. Have you ever done this?
no,
Oh,
no, no.
it's fantastic because you mentioned it, and that it absolutely plays out that way. So, and it's particularly helpful with aggressive behavior, because a lot of times people will say, "Well, I do this at work, but I'm not like that outside of
Yeah,
the office."
that's true.
And so a lot of times for LWS, and I just had a client last week who scored reports with family members, and you can do things like a club or something that
Uh-huh.
whatever, but external to the organization. And
Yeah,
it typically always surprises people that yes, there's a difference, but it's not as dramatic as you thought it was.
right.
You're still doing those things outside. And this brings me to one of my favorite stories. I'll keep it short because I think I told this story before, but about a senior leader. This was in the U.S. about 12 years ago, who used LWS and actually used it with their senior leadership team because they just had so much aggression and conflict that leaders weren't capable of really working together, and that that's a problem. So they used LWS, and of course, one of the most aggressive people was the CEO himself. And the coach attempted to sort of debrief the report. And a great example of how we had awareness but not acceptance. They
Right.
saw the profile, they understood it. Okay, I'm aggressive, but I don't accept that that's my problem. I don't accept, right? The feedback was basically, well, everybody else needs to, be a little tougher and deal with it. And that's the
Hmm.
way I am. That's their
Fairly
problem, not
common.
my
Yeah.
problem, right? Yeah. And so they basically canceled the coaching after the first session. They said,
Mm,
I'm not the one who needs to change, and so
mm,
on. Anyway, 6 months later, they called the coach and said, I think I'd like to revisit my LWS report. And the coach said, well, why now? We already met and talked about this, and you weren't interested. And the feedback was, well, I have an 8-year-old daughter, and she says she doesn't want to play with daddy anymore because, every time we play together, board games or whatever it is, daddy has to win, and that's not very much fun for anybody.
no.
So maybe I should
Mm,
look at this behavior. And it's such a beautiful example of,
yeah.
nobody, even though we can measure these things and we can coach people on these things, again, no one can change you but you.
Yeah.
So when we work with leaders, we've got to figure out what matters to them,
Yeah.
what is going right, what is going to encourage you to actually take these steps. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, in this case, it wasn't their team and their company and the
Yeah.
consequences it was having, but it was something else. So it's a
Yeah.
great point for coaches to ask those, try to dig into what does this person really care about, because even though we can show them the way and help guide, they ultimately are the ones that have to take the steps.
Yeah. Yeah. That it is true. Not related to this, but I knew a family whose little boy said to his mum, "If you don't stop smoking, you're not going to get any more hugs from me."
Oh,
And she stopped smoking.
yeah, right.
She wanted the
There you
hugs
go.
more than the
Yeah,
cigarette. So good for him.
yeah, that is
Yeah,
the
yeah. So families can have a real, if you're prepared to listen to them and
right.
see what they're saying, you can have a real impact on behavior for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Hmm.
wonderful, wonderful insights. Goodness.
Wow.
How are we doing? Oh, we're goodness, that went quickly.
It did for me. It did for
Okay,
me.
just keep doing this. Cool, fantastic. Well, in our last 3 minutes, I don't know, are there any points from anyone? Any questions from those who are taking part? Talking to you, it's your experience, your perspective. You really get it, and not just leadership and coaching leaders, but how this fits into a bigger picture
Yeah.
for the
Thank
organization and
you.
the people we lead, and the things that really do make a difference. And anyway, that's really great to work with you, and it's great to collaborate for our clients to help bring them positive, sustainable, and real change, and to help them do their best every day without burning out or
Oh,
burning each other out.
it's catching on. I like it.
It is. It is. That's
Remember the
right.
hashtag. Yeah,
That's
thank
it.
you. And it's been a pleasure to sit with you in this environment as well. And of course, get the opportunity to post it on
Yeah.
my audience for LinkedIn and
Yeah.
allow more people to see the work of human synergistics and particularly the LWS as well. So, yeah, hopefully more collaboration to come.
It is a win-win-win actually. So
Yes. Yeah. Well,
for
yeah.
us and
Yeah.
the clients we help, absolutely.
Absolutely. All right.
So happy to continue the journey. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time today and all of your
Thank you, Tom.
insights. It's always a pleasure.
Not at all. Thank you.